Fairground and Theme Park workers of Reddit. What is the biggest malfunction that went unnoticed by the public? Story 1. I worked for the theme park inside the Mall of America as a ride operator for several years back in the early aughts. I cannot speak for other theme parks, but for that one I can tell you that the rides at the one I worked at were really safe. They all had fairly state-of-the-art hydraulic systems that were routinely maintained. The larger rides are run through several safety tests first thing in the morning before the park opens. And certain large rides like the log ride and the roller coasters are actually ridden by park supervisors each day before they're allowed to be opened. Probably 98 of the time, the injuries we did have to deal with were the direct result of parents either not supervising their children or actively encouraging their kids to break the rules. The children themselves were usually on their best behavior because they knew that I could remove them from the ride if they broke the rules, but the parenting at theme parks is abysmal. I have so many stories of parents putting their children in harm's way on purpose. I could do a whole AMA just on that topic. The worst mechanical malfunction I ever had was on a ride that I believe no longer exists. They're called the Might Axe. It made the news in the 90s for getting stuck upside down, and the fire department had to cut everyone out. What the news media left out was that the maintenance department could have gotten everyone down in 10 minutes, but people called 911 from their phones and the fire department overruled the maintenance guys and spent 2 hours cutting everyone out of their seat restraints, which cost the theme park a ton of money to fix. I wasn't working at the park when that happened, but afterwards there were strict guidelines put in place for when it did get stuck. During my tenure at the park I got assigned to that ride rotation a lot and had the mighty axe get stuck upside down twice. Both times maintenance was able to fix the problem pretty swiftly, but it would result in people trying to call 911 every time, which was very annoying. The worst was watching people try to wriggle out of their seat restraints while upside down because they apparently thought it would be a great idea to try to get loose and then fall 2 stories into a concrete pit. People are remarkably stupid. Edit. If you want to check to see if a ride is safe at an amusement park, the one thing you should look for is if the ride operator leaves their station while the ride is in motion. At safety-conscious amusement parks, ride operators are forbidden from leaving their station, usually the panel with the buttons, while the ride is running. There was one time I was at a smaller amusement park in Iowa where the ride operator literally walked away from his station while it was going in order to retrieve a lost hat clear on the other side of the ride. This is very dangerous because if something goes wrong, the operator is not at the panel, it hit the abort or emergency stop buttons. It's also dangerous because the ride operator is taking their eyes off the ride and may not see a person in distress. I took pride when I worked at my amusement park that I was extremely vigilant in watching the riders, because at the end of the day I knew I was operating a piece of heavy machinery with children on board. Edit 2. I cannot speak for any other amusement park, but I will say the amusement park inside the Mall of America has some of the strictest safety rules in the country. Ride operators are constantly monitored to make sure they are in accordance with the safety rules posted. If you got lazy and ignored some of the safety rules, for example letting a small child ride a kiddie ride without a chaperone, you would get slapped with a disciplinary warning called a safety short for safety violation. The park was extremely strict on this policy. If you got 3 safeties within a certain time period, I think it was a year, then you would be automatically terminated. Edit 3. Thank you for the Reddit gold, kind stranger. I know Reddit gets annoyed with all of the thanks for the gold edits, but I really do appreciate the gilding. You've made my week. Story 2. I worked at a water park. Anytime the wave pool or a slide got shut down to adjust chemical levels or whatever, it was most likely because a kid took in it. Happens all the time. Story 3. While I've never worked at a fairground, theme park or other such location, you'll never forget the malfunction that my friends and I exploited at Dave & Buster's one night. For those of you who may not be familiar with the establishment, Dave & Buster's is sort of a restaurant, sports bar, and arcade all rolled into one. There are dozens of allegedly skill-based games from which you can win tickets, and then you can use those tickets to buy cheap prizes that you don't actually want and won't actually use. That is, of course, unless you buy a whole bunch of those sticky hand things. Those things are awesome. Anyway, on the night in question, my friends and I discovered a game in which you were supposed to hit a button at just the right time to make a ball drop into a numbered ring. It was designed to be insanely difficult, and in fact it might have been impossible, had it not been for the hand-sized hole in one side of the machine. We took turns playing the game, which involved acting like we were trying to time our button presses, then catching the ball as it fell and quickly depositing it into the highest scoring ring. We managed to rack up several hundred tickets in this way, but our best discovery came when we were ready to turn those tickets in. It used to be that when you turned in tickets for prizes, arcades would run them through a counting machine. At Dave & Buster's, we discovered that they used a scale to determine how many tickets a customer had accumulated. Also, it happened to be positioned in such a way that if one were to lean on the counter at just the right angle, they'd be able to push down on the scale during the weighing process. By the end of the outing, my friends and I had actually managed to buy a $20 piece of schlock for the low price of only $20. And at one of those arcades, that's definitely a victory. If I recall correctly, we left that night with a vaguely futuristic-looking alarm clock. That was only because they were out of those sticky hand things, though. TLDR, we cheated Dave and never got busted. Story 4. I went to Disney World when I was 8 and Snow White or some princess was standing up against the wall taking photos. I somehow glanced behind her and saw that her dress was ripped. Like her was completely out, she was wearing a white thong and she was taking pictures like nothing was happening. I was 8, so I had no thoughts. All I thought was EW, yikes. Edit, actually now that I think about it, the fact that she was being so relaxed chill while her and Thong were exposed is pretty hot. Even the contrast between seeing a woman, who's made up like a Disney princess, and seeing her bare in a thong is hot itself. Story 5. I worked at a certain amusement park in Ohio that was considered America's roller coaster in 2005. That summer, the transformer generator of a particularly wicked roller coaster of a cyclonic nature blew, and we had to literally pull people back into the station with a rope tied to the car, and about 20 people. Instead of completely replacing it, they just worked at making it usable for the rest of the summer, and throughout the rest of the year, we would have the ride go into emergency shutdown mode at random times. We were told just to try turning it off and on again until the code cleared, without any inspections or anything like that. Story 6. I worked at a small amusement park one summer. As someone else said, the biggest issues weren't the rides themselves but kids' parents not following the rules. We had one ride, I think it might be called the Paratrooper, and parents would constantly try to get their kids on the ride despite the height requirements. The only protection from falling out of that ride was a lap bar, and sometimes kids would wriggle their way pretty far under that. I wasn't working, but apparently one time a kid actually got all the way under and was holding onto the bar for dear life until the worker managed to stop the ride. Cleanup at the park was pretty disgusting. We'd pretty much just throw water on the blood vomit until it was rinsed away. Maybe we used bleach water for the blood. I can't remember. No gloves or anything for cleanup. Then we wouldn't let anyone sit in that car for the rest of the day. But as far as I knew, they didn't do a more thorough cleaning at any point. Story 7. I worked at Disney World for a little while, and most of the major malfunctions Disney either fixed or shut the ride down quickly. The biggest one, that I think is still there today, is the Yeti in Expedition Everest. It's a huge mammoth machine that's supposed to swing down at the riders, but it broke a while ago. The problem is to fix the Yeti would require some major work, so they just left it as is and put strobe lights on it. I don't know if they fixed it recently, but for years it didn't work. As I said, Disney tended to fix ride errors quickly. Like during spring break when some idiot jumped off the log on Splash Mountain and pried Burr Bear's club off the floor and dropped it in the flume, ride was shut down real quick. Story 8. Not a ride operator, but had one fail while on it, and it's terrifying. Around 10 years ago, a few of my friends decided to go to Cedar Point. Everything was fine right up to deciding to ride the Power Tower. We all sat down in the seats and everything seemed fine. I used to live close to Geauga Lake in the 90s, so I've rode these types of rides often. Anyways, I sit down and started talking to my friends, and pushed down the hydraulic metal restraint thing. Everything seemed fine, until we started moving up into the air. About halfway up, I noticed that the hydraulic metal restraint thing never locked. Halfway up in the air, my friends noticed that I was able to move the seat belt up in the air, so we all start screaming at the ride OP, but they never heard us. I came to realize that I could die and did the only thing I could think to do in this situation. I put all strength to hold the bars to my chest while the ride is dropping to the ground, which wasn't too bad until the ride shot you back into the air. This was when I was very close to not being able to hold on anymore, but I managed and the ride ended. After the ride stopped, I couldn't move and my friend said I was completely white-faced. I then noticed blood dripping from my hands. I was squeezing my hands so tight that my fingernails dug into my skin. 10 years later that I am still shaking from just writing the story. Sadly, I have not been back since that day. It's actually not the first time something scary like that happened to me. It's just the worst one. The other ones were when I was much younger and involved Geauga Lake. Not exactly a ride exactly, but a swimming pool type thing called the Wave. They removed, or changed it, when people were getting hurt and almost drowning left and right. The problem with it was that they allowed in tubes, and a busy day it would be nothing but rafts. The old design was one huge wave that came every 5 to 10 minutes, so you would likely be underwater, if there would be too many rafts. It's not easy to find a place to come up from. If you're a kid, trying to push a 300-pound person off raft is almost impossible. Found a video from about 5 to 8 years before that happened to me. I don't think they rented out in tubes and rafts yet. I just remembered that it was only one season that rented them out. The other danger was getting sucked into the vent after the wave. That happened to a friend of mine. Medics got called because his head was bleeding. Edit. Seems that over the years the design of the seat changed. 10 years ago there was never a backup seatbelt thing like the picture shows. Edit 2. When I say seatbelt type thing I mean the metal harness that goes over your body and should lock into place. I was having a brain to think of the name. When I was there wasn't the extra seatbelt that shows in the picture. I'll update the other questions after I eat dinner. Edit 3. This was a while ago, but I'm pretty sure the ride oper was just randomly checking a few here and there. I really don't remember too much of what happened after I got off the ride. I was basically in shock. I think that one of my friends, or then girlfriend, started screaming at the operator. I really am having trouble with the events after, until we started driving home. I'm sure that we left right after the incident. Story 9. Ironically, I just posted this in our Tales from Retail some mutter years ago. I was working my summer vacation at an amusement park, running a roller coaster. I got to sit and push buttons, give the safety instructions, etc. So we get the train full of people, I get the all clear, hit the button to start the train up the hill, when I see something out of my periphery. A guy has somehow climbed the gigantic wall surrounding the ride, and has dropped down next to the track, where I am about to send a metal train full of people at 40 miles per hour. I slam on the emergency stop button, which shuts down everything on the ride, and grab the phone for security. My coworkers come up to see what's happening, and I point to the guy down in the ride zone. he's acting weird and erratic, and is actually climbing on the roller coaster's track, and is taking off his clothes. Security tells us not to approach him in case he's dangerous, and to move the people in line away. Meanwhile, I head up the stairs to talk to the people who are stuck in the ride. The stairs were open, metal things, extra narrow, steep, and at this point damp. In the best of times, I hated climbing them. I get up and most of the people are calm, except for one woman who is freaking out. She's panicking that the ride is malfunctioning, and that she wants off. Now, I understand panic attacks and how you're completely slave to them, so I'm calmly telling everyone that I was the person who hit the emergency stop, why I did it, etc. From their viewpoint, they literally could see the guy climbing up the track, security chasing after him, etc. I've called for a manager to let this lady off because I'm not able to do it, so the manager finally arrives, lets this woman off with dire warnings about how dangerous the steps can be. By this point, the police are arriving. There's all sorts of stuff going on in the sights of the patrons as they are trying to arrest this guy, and then a guy on the ride announces he wants off too, so the manager lets him off. He climbs over another guest, faces the train, and calmly announces that this entire thing, the half-naked man, security, the police, all of it was just a cover-up for the fact that the ride had malfunctioned and that they were all going to die, and he'll be damned if they didn't believe him. We evacuated that ride, and 2 people slipped walking down those stairs. I had to fill out massive paperwork to keep people from suing. Thankfully we were able to call a cop over to witness. After police left, the ride was started back up, with no issues. Story 10. My dad worked at Knott's Berry Farm as head of maintenance in Southern California for like 15 years in the 80s and 90s, and I grew up going in the behind the scenes at the park, and riding the rides before it opened. I have a couple stories. Fun fact: my mom and dad met at the chicken dinner restaurant. A guy jumped from the parachute ride and committed suicide. I grew up going on that ride and it was terrifying. It was this tiny little latch at the top of that cage to keep you in, and it was all shaky in the wind. An employee who worked on the big steam train that cruises around the park was crushed between 2 of the cars. How I remember my dad telling me is that he got crushed between the train coupler and he was alive at first, but when they were going to pull it apart he would die. Now I was 10 when that happened, so I could have the details a bit off. There was this ride, the perilous plunge, and a lady fell from a highest point and died. Also I remember my dad telling me it was cause she was super fat and the belt came off cause it was not made for people her size. Now I never rode this ride because it was always closed every time we went to the park. Story 11. I'm having my sister tell me some stories. Since she's worked at Disney World, Universal Studios, and SeaWorld, at SeaWorld she was a camp counselor over a summer. Her kids 1 week were 2nd and 3rd graders and she was taking them to under the dolphin area to watch them. Just so happens that at that time there was a dolphin. Just 30 dolphins in one big ball going at it. They went up to go feed them, and since they were all so busy, only one fat dolphin came up to eat, while occasionally you would see some tails come up and splash. Story 12. Worked at Disneyland's California Adventure in my youth. I can't talk about minor parks and carnivals, but Disney does not around with safety. Checks by OSHA Occupational Safety and Health Association would do routine checks on everything, plus safety checks before and after operation. One time, I jokingly told a coworker to emergency stop the ride because we're told to never e-stop a ride unless you see severe structural failure. Well, he did it. The complete ride came screeching to a halt. Indoor ride, no loops or anything, and well, let's say that everyone was obviously trained and prepared for these kinds of situations. However, be aware that whatever seat you're sitting in, someone has pissed in it, and I'm not talking a couple drops either. Story 13. I worked at a theme park for a couple of years. One of the best malfunctions I can remember was actual damage to the ride discovered by the maintenance guy. This was a wooden roller coaster that covered quite a bit of land area. As part of the maintenance duties, they would check the concrete footers for the many structural beams. I was operating the ride and the maintenance guy told me he would be inside the ride perimeter conducting checks. Not even 2 minutes later I see him running to the maintenance shed as the ride is going up the lift. Then the phone rang. It was maintenance telling me to stop the ride. I did so without hesitation. As the ride neared the top of the first lift hill, we had to extract everyone from the ride. After everyone was off the ride and we cleared the lines, I was informed that several of the concrete footers were cracked. The ride was shut down for several days and I had to deal with many angry customers. Story 14. I'm a ride operator at one of the big theme parks. Unless you're actually in the ride during a malfunction, you're not going to be aware. Due to the nature of our ride, it doesn't matter if one vehicle goes down, we just put them on one that works. Now if the entire ride goes down, the wait time will be bumped up to steer folks away. Like someone else said, the tech crew can fix most malfunctions in about 10 minutes. The rides are all incredibly safe. If you get hurt on a ride, chances are that it was your fault. Story 15. I just finished working at an amusement park closed for the winter, and I can assure you that those rides are incredibly safe. Every day at 6 a.m., the maintenance crew would come through to clean all the rides and run down a checklist to make sure everything was in place. At 9 a.m., the foreman would show up to work and go through that same checklist, while also test running the rides. Then at 11:30 a.m. we'd get our ride assignments and go down the checklist a third time for our individual rides. If at any point something was even slightly off, we'd report it and ride maintenance would show up within minutes to assess the situation. If they couldn't fix it within 15 minutes, which only happened once the entire summer, the ride would be shut down while they got a crew out there to fix it up. After it was fixed they would go down the checklist, call a foreman to go down the checklist, then have the ride operator do the same thing before reopening it, seems incredibly redundant, but nothing hurts your park quite like someone getting themselves hurt and or killed. By far the biggest problem we had was people ignoring the rules. Trying to get their kids on rides they were too short to ride on, arguing that they don't need to use the seat belts on the bumper cars and taking them off once the ride started, then being surprised that I had the ability to turn the ride off, wearing hats on the roller coaster, stuff like that. Plenty of obscenely angry parents, especially during Oktoberfest. Yes, people brought their small children to Oktoberfest, a bunch of screaming kids, all that stuff you hear about, but there are also plenty of fun stories to cancel the bad ones out. Overall, I enjoyed my time there and will probably work there again next year if I don't manage to find a steady job in the in-between. Story 16. Story 1, I didn't work there, but back in the late 90s, there was a theme park in Tulsa called Bells. One of the roller coasters had an accident that hurt a lot of people. As it was inclining up the chain on the first hill, it lost its grip and skyrocketed backwards into the car behind it. Luckily, it wasn't too bad, but it was enough to shut it down. Story 2, also in Tulsa, at Celebration Station in late 90s. A worker died when they were dragged under a ride. It was a 8 to 10 person ship that went back and forth, eventually going upside down. Worker potatot out and put a hand in middle, and got sucked in. Edit: someone did die in Story 1, so Yukiwex Chaser for reminding me. Story 17, I worked for Six Flags Over Texas, and while not a malfunction, most people don't know about the employees that would ride the shockwave without seatbelts and standing up. The reverse G-force will hold you in your seat as long as you sat back down after the 2 loops. One female employee decided to be brave and try to do it through the whole thing. She was ejected out of the ride after the loops at the little hump, a small hill that pushes you away from the seat with a negative G-force. She fell and was saved by her face hitting a guy wire before hitting the ground. One time a motorcycle from the Batman Stunt Spectacular jumped a ramp and hit a female performer during a rehearsal run. That's all I know. Oh, and that time the tube flipped on the Roaring Rapids, it made the news, and the chick dying on the Texas Giant, it made the news too. Story 18, I'm going to Six Flags Great Adventure again next weekend. This thread better not with me. Edit: guys, I know it's safe, it's my favorite park ever. Thanks for all the reassurance though. Story 19, I worked at one of the larger theme parks for a couple of summers in my teens. As a ride operator, the first thing you'll say is that all of the ride systems have a huge number of safety redundancies in place, so that if anything goes wrong, the ride will default to a safe state automatically. The chances of any sort of mechanical malfunction causing harm is incredibly small. If you look through lists of ride accidents, nearly all of them will be a result of people being stupid, or of pre-existing health conditions. That all being said, you would be amazed at just how shoddy the maintenance work actually is. Obviously it will vary between parks, but the one I worked at was a nationally known brand, and the particular park was among their biggest. At our park, a lot of it just came down to budgeting. While I was there and for many years before and after, the park had all sorts of financial issues. So when there were maintenance issues with the various rides, they would have to be prioritized based on what they could afford in their budget. It was not uncommon that smaller or less popular rides would go down for a couple of weeks while they simply waited for enough money in the budget to be able to fix it. A particular couple of highlights in the back of the park was an older wooden coaster. It was one of the oldest in the park, and had become much less popular over the years, so it was not well kept. Maintenance crews had to walk the entire track every morning to tamp down any loose nails. There were more than a few occasions where they simply didn't have enough time to do this, so the ride would stay closed that day. Another ride, one of the ones I worked at regularly, was launched with a linear motor system, rather than the traditional chain lift hill. It was one of the first rides to use this technology, and so it suffered a whole range of problems. The ride had 2 parallel tracks, which they loved to use in the commercials to show 2 vehicles launching simultaneously and racing each other. The problem was that if we did that in daily operation, it would overload the ride system, and at least one, if not both, of the sides would fail, and the car would stop in an emergency brake section. When it did this, the maintenance guys had to come winch the vehicle back into the station, and reset the ride system. Knowing this, the ride operators were specifically instructed to not launch simultaneously, and wait at least 10 seconds between launching each side. That was on the rare occasions that both sides were operational. Usually one side was completely down, and when something went wrong with the operational side, they would steal parts from the other side to get it working. There were times when the dark track was months away from being operational because they kept salvaging parts from it. Even when only one side was working, it would still fault pretty regularly. The system overheated a fair amount, and if we cycled through too quickly, we could force it to overheat and trip. We got pretty good at doing this on demand when we wanted to have a 10-minute break. But I'll reiterate, don't be stupid, and you will be totally fine. Story 20, another former Disney cast member here. As others have said, safety is number one with our rides. In fact, the worst malfunction I experienced on my ride was a seatbelt fault. Basically, the ride couldn't tell that a seat was buckled, so we couldn't launch the ride until it was cleared. We had to get a maintenance CM in to clear it before starting the ride. However, I guess the biggest unnoticed thing I experienced was a bomb threat. There was a rather large piece of luggage left unattended by our ride, so we formed a human barrier around the area to keep guests from walking near it in case it was dangerous. Some people were a little annoyed that we were blocking their path, but otherwise they didn't question it. After it was cleared by security and taken to Lost and Found, we just went back to work like nothing happened. Story 21. I was a ride operator at a smaller theme park for several years. The rides that had the most accidents were the ones that you would not expect. The top 3 rides for accidents in our park in order were the carousel, the go-karts and the raft ride. Story 22. When I was a teenager I got a seasonal job at one of those pumpkin patch carnivals they set up in the parking lots of malls. Lots of wood chips, pumpkins, and rigged carnival games. All of the employees were high school students looking to make some cash by getting minimum wage and pocketing whatever cash customers handed to them. The proprietors lived out of a RV trailer in the lot and were the type of people that just did not give about anything except selling pumpkins. The rides were small and sketchy as, all of them were those rides that just spun in a circle, swings, carousel, boats, airplanes, teacups. They looked like they had been transported a million times and assembled in an hour. One day I was working the boat ride, which just required me to press the start button, time about a minute or so, then press the stop button, let new passengers on and take their tickets. No water on this boat ride, just boat-shaped carriages with a wheel on the bottom that spun around a central point. The safety device was a small chain that went across the children's laps. About halfway through one ride, the arm that connected the boat to the central point pops loose, sending the boat and its 5-year-old passenger careening off the platform and into the surrounding fence. Turns out the bolt that held everything together was just put in place and never actually bolted. Of course when we discovered this the manager didn't tell the parents and acted as if it was some freak occurrence instead of, negligence. I was told to bribe them by giving them as much food as they wanted from the snack bar. Many churros and snow cones were had. Story 23. Really, as long as you listen to the ride operators, everything will be fine, and if something goes wrong, just remain calm and listen to the ride operators, especially if the place is some big name famous i.e. Cedar Point, Mall of America, Six Flags, etc. The ride operators will know what to do. Happens when people decide Eve paid money so I'm gonna do whatever the I want. This is the fastest ticket to getting kicked out and getting your season pass revoked. Oh, and did I mention, at least in Ohio and I'm pretty sure in other states as well, not obeying the instructions of a ride operator and/or written instructions is a misdemeanor. Source: former ride operator. I used to work as a lifeguard at a smaller water park, and it had one of those rides where there's a countdown before the bottom drops out, something like this. What we found out from ride testing the rides every morning is that if you turned the key on, then off, then on again, the bottom would drop out without a countdown. We would almost always do the silent count whenever we were ride testing because it was more exhilarating not knowing exactly when the bottom would fall out and you would drop. However, we would also use the silent count for drops whenever a kid was being a little. Hearing them yell in surprise was always pretty satisfying. Story 24. Not really a ride malfunction as much as it was a wardrobe malfunction caused by the ride. But when I was in the 8th grade we went on one of those end-of-the-year class trips and we went to a local water park. I went down one of the water slide and landed in the pool at the bottom. Well, we had this exchange student girl from Germany or something and she went down after me. Well, when she landed in the pool she got spun around somehow and her top came off. I was too in shock of seeing for the first time to say anything for a few seconds, so I kinda just stood there for a bit. I motioned to her to check her top and she looked down, fixed it, turned a super bright shade of red, got out of the water, and didn't talk to anyone for the rest of the trip. I felt real bad for her, but a few days later, while we were signing each other's yearbooks, she thanked me for motioning for her to check her top rather than saying out loud, "Hey, you're showing TLDR, saw boobies." Told girl her top was off in a way that didn't alert the rest of the pool. Story 25. I worked at a zoo that had rides, so I guess it sort of counts. I wasn't a ground worker or someone who worked with the rides, I was just working on advertising, which I have a bachelor's degree in, for a zoo in the Midwest to help get some money for grad school that fall. Well, this particular zoo had a ride that was like a ski lift type contraption where children and adults could basically sit down, have a bar placed over them, and they could ride over the animal exhibits, seeing them from about 60 to 70 feet in the air before disembarking at an identical station at the other side of the zoo. It was really cool actually, but this zoo was so desperate to get it out they were having financial problems and moving that they ignored some less than positive results from regular testing. Since I was doing advertising for this ride, I was privy to a lot of the materials that came out pre-opening. They tested it using full backpacks filled with hay or a similarly harmless material were it to fall into an animal exhibit. These backpacks were roughly the size of a small child that was seated, that was well over the height requirement. Too bad slightly under a majority of these bags fell under the safety bar and into the animal exhibits beneath the ride. Oh, they fixed it by lowering the safety bar an entire inch and then opening the ride. Nobody has died there, but I won't be surprised when I see the news reports that it happened. Story 26. We got stuck on It's a Small World ride in Disneyland for over an hour. The song makes me want to hurl now. 1 entire hour of Chinese. It's a small world after all. Story 27. I worked as an EMT in an amusement park one summer. We had a log flume ride that if for whatever reason did not pull people up over the second hill, the flume would submerge if it was hit from behind by another flume coming down the ride. We had a specific code over the radio for it, and if we heard it we were to drop everything, haul to the ride, throw a board over the channel and start hauling people out. Thankfully never happened that summer, but someone died last time it happened 10 years prior. Story 28. Not a theme park worker. But I feel like this story fits the question. This was probably about 15 years ago. A girl in my grade went to a theme park near our town with her family. The mother was on a coaster in the car in front of her kids. When the train rolled into the station and the safety bars came up, The mother turned around and got her camera out to take a photo of her kids. The operator decided to send the train around for another go, but the mom wasn't in her seat properly, so when the train took off, she was thrown from her car. She had some back injuries, but I don't know how severe they were. A year or two later she came to our school to give a talk and seemed fully healed. So I guess it wasn't too bad. I don't think it ever was addressed picked up by any news. I only know of it because it was a friend's mom. Story 29. I used to work at an amusement park where they had Sesame Street characters. One day Big showed up drunk and puked inside the costume. He got fired. They needed someone to be Big later in the day. I worked nearby, but not as a character. Somehow they chose me. It's awkward wearing an 65 pounds costume. You look through some mesh in the neck area of the costume. It's hard to see. There's a contraption that comes down from the head which controls the head and mouth. It looks like a bicycle brake on a swivel at the end of a thin rod inside the costume. Squeezing it opens the mouth, turning or twisting it moves Big S head. Big S feet are wide. You're supposed to walk with your toes pointed outward so you don't trip. It's a lot to think about when you've never been big before. I got caught up in how crazy it was to suddenly become big. I especially liked opening and closing the mouth and moving the head around. It probably looked like Big wanted to eat someone. Maybe I should have focused more on doing basic Big things. Within 10 minutes of getting the costume on, I accidentally kicked a toddler in the chest. I just didn't see him, TLDR. Drunk Big puked so new Big could kick kid. Edit for formatting.